Need financing for a vehicle or financial assistance with late auto payments? Don't have the money to your rent or mortgage? Need financial help with utilities? And also, would you want to receive cash back rewards for paying bills? Visit our friends at financialservicessolutions.com, where you can get an array of packages that will fit your needs, from monthly investments to virtual wallet accounts. You get debit cards, you get an array of services, and you can pick between 4 different packages. Visit our friends at financialservicessolutions.com today. So the California Reparations Task Force has released their interim report. It's about 500 pages. I went through to find the section where they had the key findings, and that way you don't go through that 500-page report. We'll be weeks trying to go through something like that on the podcast. But let's get to the key findings and see what they're saying here. So they said that from colonial times forward, governments at all levels adopted and enshrined white supremacy beliefs and passed laws in order to maintain slavery. It's a system of dehumanization and exploitation that stole the life, labor, liberty, and intellect of people of African descent. They say this system was maintained by and financially benefited the entire United States of America and its territories. They say the system of white supremacy is a persistent badge of slavery that continues to be embedded today in numerous American and California legal, economic, and social and political systems throughout, let's say, American history and across the entire country. Laws and policies, violence and terror have upheld white supremacy. They say all over the country, but particularly in the South. During the era of legal segregation, they say federal, state, and local governments directly engaged in, supported, or failed to protect African Americans from the violence and terror aiming to subjugate African Americans. I'm just reading the language as they put it in here. They say government actions and derelictions of duty, they have caused compounding physical and psychological injury for generations. Say in California, racial violence against African Americans began during slavery. They continued through the 1920s as groups like the Ku Klux Klan permeated local governments and police departments, and peaked after World War II as African Americans attempted to move into white neighborhoods. Now, they said after the Civil War, as the African Americans briefly won political power during Reconstruction, southern states responded by systemically stripping African Americans of their power to vote. Racist lawmakers elected from southern states blocked hundreds of federal civil rights laws and edited other important legislation to exclude or discriminate against African Americans. It said these coordinated efforts at the federal level harmed Black Californians, it said particularly when coupled with discrimination at the state and local levels. Now, continuing, they say government actors working with private individuals, they say actively segregating America into Black and white neighborhoods. In California, federal, state, and local governments created segregation through discriminatory federal housing policies, zoning ordinances, decisions on where to build schools, and discriminatory federal mortgage policies known as redlining. They say it was funded by the federal government. The California state and local governments also destroyed Black homes, communities through park and highway construction, urban renewal, and by other means. Enslavers denied education to enslaved people in order to control them. Throughout American history, when allowed schooling at all, it said Black students across the country and in California have attended schools with less funding and resources than white students. After slavery, southern states passed laws to prevent Black and white students from attending the same schools. Throughout the country, even after the U.S. Supreme Court held separate but equal to be unconstitutional, children went to school in their neighborhoods, so education segregation was further entrenched by residential segregation. Now, many public schools in the United States never integrated in the first place, or were integrated and then resegregated. Now, I say today, California is the 6th most segregated state in the country for Black students who attend under-resourced schools. Now, we will continue due to the residential segregation, and compared to white Americans, they say African Americans are more likely to live in worse quality housing and in neighborhoods that are polluted with inadequate infrastructure. As the Black Californians face similar harms. It's kind of interesting they use an African American then say Black. I'm just trying to, are you going to pick one? I'm just looking at it. But like I said, nothing going to be perfect. And it's all about the said goal, right? Now, I say the next point say government financial assistance programs and policies have historically excluded African Americans from receiving benefits. Say the current child welfare system in the country and in California operates on harmful and untrue racial stereotypes of African Americans. This has resulted in extremely high rates of removal of black children from their families, even though black parents do not generally mistreat their children at higher rates than white parents. As a black children thus disproportionately suffer the loss of their families and additional harms associated with being in the child welfare system. Yeah, because they do take a lot of black children away for not much or nothing. That do happen. That's a federal and state governments, including California, fail to protect black artists, culture makers, and media makers from discrimination and simultaneously promoted discriminatory narratives. State governments memorialize the Confederacy as just and heroic through monument building while suppressing the nation's history of racism and slavery. Now we continue here with the executive summary. It's a federal, state, and local government actions in California have directly segregated and discriminated against African Americans at work. Federal and state policies like affirmative action produce mixed results and were short-lived. The African Americans continue to face employment discrimination today in the country and in California. They say the American government at all levels, including in California, has historically criminalized African Americans for the purpose of social control and to maintain an economy based on exploited black labor. It said this criminalization is an enduring badge of slavery and has contributed to the over-policing of black neighborhoods, the school to prison pipeline. It said the mass incarceration of African Americans, a refusal to accept African Americans as victims, and other inequities. It say in nearly every corner of the American California legal system. So as a result, the American and California criminal justice system physically harms, imprisons, and kills African Americans more than any other racial group relative to their percentage of the population. Now, they said the government actions described in this report have had a devastating effect on the health of African Americans in the country and in California compared to white Americans. African Americans live shorter lives and are more likely to suffer and die from almost all diseases and medical conditions than white Americans. Researchers have linked these health outcomes in part to African Americans' unrelenting experience of racism in society. So in addition, to physical harm, African Americans experience psychological harm, which can profoundly undermine black children's emotional and physical well-being and their academic success. That is so true. Dealing with racism, white supremacy affects you more. I think it do affects us physically, but I believe that we're more affected psychologically than anything. Because if you don't believe in yourself, if you think that you can't do certain things because of racism, right? That's affecting you. Like putting our children in those schools. That's why I'm so hardcore against the public school system, because I've seen black children that's in it and how they perform. And then I see how black children perform when they're not in it. You know what I'm saying? Either they go into all, black school with great teachers or they being homeschooled. I just seen the difference. Now, let's say the last point, they say government laws and policies perpetuating badges of slavery have helped white Americans accumulate wealth while erecting barriers that prevent African Americans from doing the same. So these harms compounded over generations resulted in an enormous gap in wealth between white and African Americans today in the nation and in California. Now, let me talk about that. The majority of black Americans actually are more renters than homeowners. Now, why is that important? Why is that important to talk about that aspect of it? Well, the reason why I'm talking about that aspect of it is because when you are a homeowner, you can transfer wealth. You definitely can transfer wealth. Okay. So now let's go to the point where they say preliminary recommendations. It's kind of lengthy here, but we're going to try to get through it quickly as possible. It's about it's about 6 pages, but hey, that's what the podcast is for, right? We want to make sure you get the information. So their recommendations for future deliberation. It's say enslavement. Start there. It's say end legal slavery in California by doing the following: deleting language from the California Constitution that permits involuntary servitude as punishment for a crime by passing ACA 3. Repealing penal code. It says Section 2700, which states that the California Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation shall require of every able-bodied prisoner in prison in any state prison as many hours of faithful labor in each and every day during his or her term of imprisonment, or shall as described by the rules and regulations of the Director of Corrections. So they say pass legislation that makes education, substance use, and mental health treatment and rehabilitative programs. It said the first priority for incarcerated people. In addition, allowed incarcerated people to make decisions regarding how they will spend their time and which programs and jobs they will do while incarcerated. So they require that incarcerated people, they say, who are working in prison or jail be paid a fair market rate for their labor. I agree with that. I think that if they working in there, they should get paid at least minimum wage, at least that much. And that way you put it in their commissary account. Now you ain't got brothers down there looking for anything. You know what I'm saying? Or doing the things they got to do to get things out of commissary. You know what I'm saying? So hell yeah. And then even though a lot of times commissary got a limit, when you get out, that if you stack your bread up, you come out of there with money and cut them brothers they check. So hell yeah, I agree with that part. Cause like I said, I got a family member locked up and I know how it is for him, and I make sure, try to send him something. Now they say prohibit for-profit prison companies from operating from within the system. They say that require that any goods or services available for purchase by incarcerated people and their families be provided at the same cost as those goods and services outside the prison. I can agree with that. They say allow people who are incarcerated to continue to exercise their right to vote. Yeah, why shouldn't they be able to vote? You ain't harming nobody by voting, right? It's to implement a comprehensive reparation scheme, as will be detailed in the task force final report. It says transmit the task force final report and findings to the president and the Congress, and the recommendations that the federal government create a reparations commission for African Americans, American freedmen through statute or executive action. They say require. Now, I disagree with executive action. We need a law, because any president can come behind and change that. Okay. So as a request the state of California and the U.S. federal government to facilitate data disaggregation as if for Black/African racial groups. Now they say racial terror. That's the next section. They say make it easier to hold law enforcement officers, and say including correctional officers and their employing agency accountable for unlawful harassment and violence, including a provision overruling the extratextual specific intent requirement that California courts have read into the Bain Act. It said 2, a provision eliminating state law immunities that shield officers' misconduct. It said and explicitly rejecting protections. It said to qualified immunity under federal law. It's saying a provision for an additional special damages when the unlawful conduct is shown to be racially motivated. Okay, so now they're talking about qualified immunity right there. Now, okay, now we can agree with that. It's a create forms of expression, acknowledgement, and remembrance of the trauma of state-sanctioned white supremacist terror, possibly including memorials and funding. It's a long-term Truth and Reconciliation Commission. I don't care about that. But, I'm just reading it. It's to estimate the value of Black-owned businesses and property in California is stolen or destroyed through acts of racial terror. Distribute this amount back to Black Californians and make housing grants, zero interest business and housing loans, and grants available to Black Californians. Let me see how I think about that. Okay, get the people their land back. If I was in California, you talking about giving me a housing grant, zero interest business and housing loans. That can help Black people. Oh, it can, because the majority of Black people rent. They don't own. Black people need to own a home. But my God, the home ownership is just, oh my God, the prices. But let me read it as it is. And they're talking about giving also grants, okay? Some people, let me keep reading. That was just a racial terror section. Now they're talking about political disenfranchisement. It said create reforms. It said acknowledgement and apology for acts of political disenfranchisement. I don't really agree with the apologies. I don't agree with that, because the apologies is hot air. It's a pass legislation that is in the element of the objectives stated in AB 2576. It's an establish separate funding for voter education and outreach. It's a provide state funding and charge the Secretary of State office with making It's a grants to county registrars for programs to integrate voter registration and pre-registration and civic education programs that increase voter registration within the county's underrepresented communities and high school students. Okay. I don't know why they use the term underrepresented communities. That's interesting. Consider legislation to prevent dilution of the black vote through redistricting. It's a require legislative policy committees to conduct racial impact analysis of all proposed legislation and require the administration to include a comprehensive racial impact analysis for all budget proposals and proposed regulations, allow individuals with felony convictions to serve on juries, and prohibit judges and attorneys from excluding jurors solely for having a criminal record. Out of the whole political disenfranchisement part, I think that's the part I like the most. That's the part I like the most. A lot of that political disenfranchisement, I'm not really liking the language in that. Let's get to housing segregation. All right. So they said that identify and eliminate anti-black housing discrimination policies, compensate individuals forcibly removed from their homes due to state action, including but not limited to park construction, highway construction, and urban renewals. They prevent current banking and mortgage-related discrimination, including but not limited to discriminatory actions. It's as a result of artificial intelligence and automated data analysis. It's a repeal Article 34 of the California Constitution, repeal or counteract the efforts of crime-free housing policies that disproportionately limit black residents' access to housing. It's to establish a state-subsidized mortgage system that establishes low interest rates for qualified California black mortgage applicants. Okay, what is this qualification? I was curious about that. Let's say if previous and eliminate current policies and practices that overwhelmingly contribute to the vast overrepresentation of African Americans among the unhoused population, because they're talking about the homeless. It's to identify and eliminate any policies with blatant anti-black residency requirements or preferences, invalidate and deem unlawful any contract with anti-black racial covenants. Now, they say provide clean and secure public housing for vulnerable populations, include those persons who are formerly incarcerated in a foster care system and unhoused individuals. They provide development incentives for businesses that provide healthy foods, specifically grocery stores in predominantly black neighborhoods to address, increasingly prevalent food swamps. Now we're going to go to separate and unequal education. That's a section there. It's add black students to the existing 3 student groups listed in the supplemental grants. It's provisions of the local control funding formula. Methodically guide this funding to provide instruction, supports, enrichment, and counseling to black students. They eliminate and identify racial bias or discriminatory practices in standard testing, inclusive of statewide K-12 proficiency assessments, undergraduate and postgraduate eligibility assessments, and professional career exams. And they mention all the different ones there. They said provide funding for free tuition to California colleges and universities. Okay, so they're talking about free college, no matter where you go. I'm looking at what they're talking about here. Let's say provide funding for African American and American freedmen owned and controlled K-12 schools, colleges, and universities, trade and professional. Okay, so they were talking about giving money if you want to create a school or you got a college, maybe you want to open a HBCU. They're talking about giving money for that. At least their recommendations. Let's say adopt mandatory curriculum for teachers, credentialing that includes culture responsive pedagogy. It's an anti-bias training and restorative practices, and develop strategies to proactively recruit African American teachers to teach K through 12 public schools. Reduce arbitrary segregation within California public schools and the resulting harms to black students at majority non-white under-resourced schools by creating poorer school district boundaries that allow students from neighboring districts to attend. It's a increase availability and inter-district transfers to increase the critical mass of diverse students at each school so the students are assigned or able to attend public schools based on the factors independent of the parents' income level and ability to afford housing in a particular neighborhood or city. Now, they provide scholarships to black high school graduates to cover 4 years of undergraduate education, similar to the GI Bill. To address specific ongoing discrimination facing California schools. So basically what they're saying is give all black kids a scholarship. Okay, we will continue. is to implement systemic review of public and private school disciplinary records to determine levels of racial bias and require all schools to implement racially equitable disciplinary practices. They require that curriculum at all levels and all subjects be inclusive, free of bias, and honor the contributions. They say experience all peoples regardless of ethnicity, race, gender, or sexual orientation. I don't know why that was added in there. If we're talking about black people, okay. Let's say advance the timeline for the ethnic studies classes in public and private high schools, adopt a K through 12 black studies curriculum that includes students to concepts of race and racial identity, accurately depict historic racial inequities and systemic racism, honor black lives, fully represents contributions of black people in society, and advance the ideology of black liberation. They say encourage identification and support of teachers who give culturally nurturing instructions and adopt new models for teaching development to improve teacher habits in the classroom. Say improve funding and access to the educational opportunities for all incarcerated people in both juvenile and adult correctional facilities. Out of that section, separate in education, okay, if you want to give that in addition to some things, but like I said, we just want to go through this. We're taking our time, ladies and gentlemen. We're going to do it. Now, I say racism in environment and infrastructure. They're talking about identifying and addressing the impact of environmental racism on predominantly black communities, including but not limited to unequal exposure to pollutants associated with roadway and heavy truck traffic, oil drilling, drinking water contamination, and current and former heavily industrial and other potential pollutants in the black neighborhoods. They say require and fund the statewide planting of trees to create shade equity and minimize heat islands in black neighborhoods. They say ensure the state and local allocation of resources to public transit systems is equitable and on a per rider basis for methods of transit that are disproportionately utilized by low-income urban and black residents. They say support development of policies and practices that limit the unequal siting of vice retail businesses, which they mean liquor stores, tobacco, etc., in black neighborhoods. And they say support black neighborhoods, develop policies and practices that promote locating health as a retailers, okay, which is grocery stores, farmers markets, to say within the black community. They say support the work of the community-based organizations in identifying black resident interests, needs within the neighborhoods. So they say in like farmers markets and public transportation. They continue to say support the work of community-based organizations to ensure safe access to neighborhood-level physical activity spaces like public parks. They reduce the density of food swamps in black neighborhoods. They said like high densities of fast food restaurants because they're always feeding us trash. As they introduce climate change mitigation and adaptive strategies and measures, take cooling centers, increase green space that reduce urban heat island effects and air pollution concentrations. They say equalize community benefit infrastructure funding among black and white neighborhoods. Now they said like bike trails, drinking water pipes, sidewalks. Okay, so basically saying put the same thing you got in the white neighborhoods like you do in the black neighborhoods, okay? I said the next section is called pathologizing black families. They said compensate families who were denied familiar inheritance by the way of racist anti-miscegenation statutes, laws, and precedents that denied black heirs resources they would receive if they had been white. Realign federal temporary assistance to needy families is a funding devoted to the direct assistance to impoverished families in order to provide greater funding, let's say, to poor families that have historically been denied equal welfare benefits pursuant to a variety of subversive racist policies and practices. Now, they said here, address the severely desperate involvement of black families within the child welfare and foster care system, review and adopt policies that caregivers in the child welfare system are allowed to meet requirements and have access to resources to care for their family members. They say ensure. It said the black men and women have access to effective, high-quality, trauma-informed, as a culturally competent, intimate partner and or guardian violence treatment and services outside the criminal legal system. It say eliminate past due child support owed to the government for non-custodial parents. Okay, I can rock with that. I can rock with that to a point. It say eliminate the collection of child support as a means to reimburse the state for current or past government assistance. I can rock with that too. Okay, right on. It says ensure that all child support payments are provided directly to the custodial parent and the child. They say eliminate the annual interest charge for past due child support. Man, well, finally somebody trying to address this. I think, sure, a lot of people like that. They say allow incarcerated parents when appropriate to strengthen and maintain their relationship with their children by doing the following: provide ongoing wraparound family reunification and maintenance services to incarcerated people and their families, and to provide mental health support designed specifically to heal trauma and strengthen family ties, including, it said, both individual and family treatment when needed. It said develop spaces and programs for incarcerated people, and say to spend time with their children in non-institutional, non-punitive settings when appropriate. Prohibit the state prison system and local jails from canceling family visits as a form of punishment. I agree with that. They say, they say require that all visitation policies be culturally competent, trauma-informed, and non-threatening for family members. Allow free telephone and video calls to allow incarcerated persons to maintain connections to their family, and other family members for, cases not involving domestic or family abuse. Okay, I can agree with that. If you let everybody talk and without paying anything, let them do that. Is accommodate telephone and video meetings between incarcerated parents and their children's caregivers, physicians, and teachers to allow parents to participate in decision making regarding their children's care needs and education. I can agree with that too. Just because you may be locked up doesn't mean that you just should not have any say so at all. I mean, because some, in our community, not everybody out here committing murder like that. Okay, the next section is called control over creative, cultural, and intellectual life. They said they want to identify and eliminate anti-Black discrimination policies in the areas of artistic, culture, and creative, athletic, and intellectual life, provide financial restitution and compensation to athletes or their heirs for injuries sustained in their work if those injuries can be linked to anti-Black discrimination policies. So compensate individuals who have been deprived of rightful profits for their artistic, creative, athletic, and intellectual work. Identify and eliminate discrimination in the industries of art, culture, invention, sports, leisure, and business, including but not limited to ensuring access to patents and royalties for cultural, intellectual, and artistic production, prohibiting discrimination and glass ceilings that harm Black artists and entrepreneurs, removing anti-Black memorials and monuments, placing clear restrictions on the use of artistic works in disciplinary or law enforcement actions, and providing a pathway to compensation for student athletes. So they're talking about a lot of compensation here in the arts. Now, the next section, stolen labor and hindered opportunity. They say you want to identify and eliminate racial bias in employment and advancement, especially for Black Californians seeking public employment or promotion to higher paid position in government. Pass legislation to advance pay equity. Adopt a clean slate policy for young people and adults to ensure that eligible criminal record expungements are done quickly and equitably. It's a remove unnecessary barriers to employment for individuals with criminal records. I agree with that. Raise the minimum wage and require a scaling up of the minimum wage for more experienced workers. Require provisions of health benefits and paid time off. And provide other missing protections for work. In food and hospitality services, agriculture, food processing, and domestic worker industries. Require or incentivize private and public employers to undergo training regarding bias in employment practice and measures to address bias in hiring, promotion, pay, and worker practices. Now they say create a fund to support development and sustainment of Black-owned businesses and eliminate, barriers to licensure that are not strictly necessary and that harm Black workers. Okay, I can agree with that. Definitely. Create and fund intensive training programs that enable Black Californians to access employment opportunities from which they have been excluded. Ban employment practices that lock in and perpetuate historic and continuing discrimination and should make eligibility for public contracts contingent on elimination of employment practices that disproportionately harm Black workers. Address disparities in transportation and limit access to jobs. And increase funding to the California Department of Fair Employment and Housing and other relevant state agencies of effectively enforcing civil rights laws and regulations. So in this section, the stolen labor, That's what we just finished. Look, now they say the unjust legal system. Now let's see what they say here. Eliminate discriminatory policing and particularly killings, use of force, and racial profiling of African Americans. Eliminate and reverse the effects of discrimination within the criminal justice system, including reviewing the cases of incarcerated African Americans in order to determine whether they have been wrongfully convicted and have received longer or harsher sentences than white people convicted of the same or similar crimes. Oh, yeah, I agree with that. Let's say review the security level determinations made by the California Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation in order to eliminate and reverse anti-black discriminatory practice and decisions that have resulted in disproportionate number of black incarcerated people being identified as members of security threat groups held in segregated housing or housed in higher security levels than their white peers. They say prevent discrimination by algorithms and new policing technologies. Eliminate the racial disparities in police stops. Eliminate the racial disparities in criminal sentencing. It's saying the over-incarceration of African Americans. Eliminate the over-policing of predominantly black communities. It's say eliminate the racial disparities and discrimination against African Americans in the parole hearing process. It's say including a criminal risk assessment used to determine suitability for parole. It's say eliminate both implicit and explicit bias in the criminal justice system, including implementing training and accountability for prosecutors, judges, parole commissioners, and parole and probation officers. And say to reduce the scope of law enforcement jurisdiction within the public safety system and shift more funding for prevention and mental health care. Now, they said that they invest in institutions that reduce the likelihood of criminal activity, such as care-based services, it's a youth development, job training, and increasing the minimum wage. Now, say require the Board of State and Community Corrections, the Judicial Council, of the Commission on the Peace Officer Standards and Training, and the Board of Parole Hearings to work with the Attorney General to collect comprehensive data on policing, convictions, sentencing, incarceration, including the use of less lethal weapons by law enforcement and demographic characteristics on a regular, monthly, quarterly, and annual basis as part of a data collection mandate of law enforcement at all levels. Report the data accurately and in a timely manner. They say, in addition, as they require the data to be available through an open data system that can be accessed and downloaded by researchers, advocates, the policymakers, and the public. Now, I agree with that. Boy, they're not gonna know how to act if they had to implement that. Actually being fair to black people. Oh my, boy, they'll lose their freaking mind. They'll lose it. Now, the next section is called mental and physical harm and neglect. Okay. So they say eliminate anti-black healthcare laws and policies and anti-black discrimination in healthcare. Compensate both financially with cost-free, high-quality, comprehensive services and supports individuals whose mental and physical health have been permanently damaged by the anti-black healthcare system policies and treatment, including but not limited to those subjected to forced sterilization, medical experimentation, racist sentencing disparities, it's a police violence, environmental racism, and the psychological harm from race-related stress. It's a identify and eliminate discrimination and systemic racism, including but not limited to discrimination by healthcare providers, inequity to access to healthcare, inaccessibility of health insurance, funding needs of health-focused community organizations. The DARTH is of clinical research on health conditions that affect African Americans, the underrepresentation of African Americans among the medical and mental health providers, and the lack of race-conscious public health policy. They create free healthcare programs. I'm always for free healthcare. I'm for free healthcare. I've been for that. But American public, I don't know why the majority of them don't want free healthcare. You let these politicians say, "Oh, free healthcare," like, no, everybody should have free healthcare. As they provide ongoing medical education, particularly on illnesses and other issues that historically impact health of African Americans, provide medical clinics, as they implement a Medi-Cal reforms to increase flexibility for the use of community evidence practice designed, tested, and implemented by the black community, and reduce the tendency to use culturally bankrupt evidence-based practices that are not field tested. Let's say identify and eliminate the biases and discriminatory practices that lead to the higher rate of maternal injury and death among black women. Now, say ensure that black women have access to competent, trained medical staff and services for all their lifetime reproductive health care needs, including birth control, prenatal and postnatal care, labor and delivery, abortion services, and perimenopause, menopause, and postmenopause care. All right. Now, the next section here is called the wealth gap. We're almost done with it, ladies and gentlemen. It's to implement a detailed program of reparations for African Americans. Okay. It's to develop and implement other policies, programs, and measures to close the racial wealth gap in California. It's to provide funding and technical assistance to black-led and black community-based land trusts to support wealth building and affordable housing. Now, implement a detailed program of reparations. I didn't see compensation. So, I mean, yes, we know reparations is restorative justice. It is, but I'm just reading it as is. You know, I'm not talking down on anything. Now, the last section, it said the California African American Freedmen Affairs Agency. It said establish a cabinet level secretary position over an African American Freedmen Affairs Agency tasked with implementing the recommendations of this task force. And say the role of the agency is to identify past harms, prevent future harm, and say work with other state agencies and branches, and say of California's government to mitigate harm, suggest policies, and say to the governor and the legislature, and say designed to compensate for the harms as they caused by the legacy of anti-black discrimination, and work to eliminate systemic racism that has developed as a result of the enslavement of African Americans in the United States. And say the agency should do the following. And say a branch to process claims with the state and assistant claims in filing for eligibility. It's a genealogy branch in order to support a potential claimant with genealogy research and to confirm eligibility. A reparations tribunal in order to adjudicate substantive claims for past harms. An office of immediate relief to expedite claims. It's a civic engagement branch to support ongoing political education on African American history and to support civic engagement among African American youth. It's a Freedmen Education branch to offer free education. It's and to facilitate the free tuition initiative between claimants and California schools. So a Social Services and Family Affairs branch is to identify and mitigate the ways that current and previous policies have damaged or destabilized black families. Services might include treatment for trauma and family healing services to strengthen the family unit, stress resiliency services, financial planning services, career planning, civil and family court services. They say a cultural affairs branch to restore African American culture and historical sites, establish monuments, advocate for the removal of racist relics, support knowledge production and archival research, and to provide for African Americans in the entertainment industry, including identifying and removing barriers to advancement into leadership and decision-making positions in the arts, entertainment, and sports industries. It's a legal affairs office to coordinate a range of free legal services, including criminal defense attorneys for criminal trials and parole hearings, a free arbitration and medication services, and to advocate for civil and criminal justice reforms. It's a division of medical services for the public and environmental health. And finally, a business affairs office to provide ongoing education related to entrepreneurialism and financial literacy, to provide business grants, and to establish public-private reparative justice-oriented partnerships. So that is what all their recommendations are. Some of them I like a lot. Some of them about. But for the most part, I think these recommendations are good. I'm just, they don't talk about dollar amounts. They do say reparations, but they don't talk about dollar amounts. They're talking about free college. Okay, fine, free college, but I say that's in addition to, reparations, which would be cash payments. Basically, reining in the race soldiers, getting rid of qualified immunity. I'm definitely in support of that. Talking about, the part about it, the prisoners. Saying basically, let these brothers and sisters too, let them call for free. Let them, if they're working in prison, let them earn, a fair wage, which is they should get paid whatever people get paid on the outside. I agree with that 100%. Letting them be involved in decisions with a doctor or school or stuff like that. I do agree with that. it's a lot of things I do agree with this. There's some things, like the political disenfranchisement, like that it wasn't too specific for me. Like, okay, voter registration. Like, look, we don't care about that in the reparations package, but you're not going to get things exactly the way I would put it, but that's what was presented, ladies and gentlemen. And I don't know what you think about this. Now, I know the white supremacist will lose his freaking mind if this was implemented. Oh my God. It's not even the money that would be the issue for the white. Well, they would be the money, but the issue for him is basically, wait a minute, I can't just do whatever I want to black people no more. I can't just sentence them for 50 years on a white person I give 5. I actually got to treat them right with respect now. I gotta, we gotta sit up here and they going to college for free. They doing this, they doing that. Oh boy, Lord, I already know them folks gonna lose their freaking mind. Now, this just a recommendation. They said the final report will be coming out a little later. And then once they bring that report back to the governor, and then they have to put this together and say, okay, the California government gotta, say what's in this they want to implement and what's in it they're not gonna implement. That's just bottom line about passing a law and the governor signing that law. But at least California, definitely ahead of the game, and other states can just take their model and just do that, at a state level. But, ladies and gentlemen, let us know what you think about this. We appreciate you joining us. Make sure you subscribe. You want to make sure you stay informed. I know it's a little long one today, but we just want to make sure you're informed what's going on with the California Reparations Commission. Make sure you click the like button. That's very important. And I know, there's many, places you can go to listen to podcasts. If you came here, we greatly appreciate it. So we'll see you definitely next time.